I want to introduce Brett Feddersen, and I'm going to read these just to make sure that I have everything that captured that I need to say here. He's a graduate of Mesa State College with a bachelor's in business administration, and earned his master's degree from University College in leadership and organizations with an emphasis in strategic innovation. Brett was a two-time champion of the Golden Eagle Invitational in parliamentary debate and made elimination rounds in 3 national championships. He is a career public servant, serving in the United States Marine Corps 10 years with the state of Colorado, and is currently an IT manager for the city of Boulder. So I want to introduce you. I also now want to introduce his Capstone Advisor, who's going to give a little bit of a background, a little bit of information on this particular topic. And Evans, who's right back here, Evans Mayhew, is his Capstone Advisor. He has served as an adjunct professor for the University of Denver for over 11 years. He's managed competitive intelligence initiatives for 2 Fortune 500 companies for a total of 7 years, leading research and strategy activities across 200+ countries. His experience has included requirements gathering across multiple projects, managing teams of business analysts, as well as providing training on business analysis tools, processes, and methodologies. Most recently, he has led a skunkworks research and development team for Western Union that has focused on creating novel technological solutions to money transfer industry challenges. While in that role, he was the lead inventor on 9 inventions for which patent applications were filed between 2009 and 2010. So I'd like to welcome Evans here to give a little bit of a preliminary introduction. Thank you.
I have to speak into the mic. Sorry, let me just Good morning, happy Saturday. I met Brett 2 years ago when I was teaching the Principles of Environmental Scanning class. And that class, although it's got environmental in the title, it really doesn't have much to do with green initiatives. It has to do with going out and looking at marketplace initiatives, looking at very broad brush, big picture strategic movements that can affect businesses, affect regulatory environments, etc. It was in that class that Brett started working on the original acorn that was to grow into the oak of this capstone. I firmly believe that in the 21st century, what is required for businesses, for individuals to truly succeed is to be able to take an integrative approach to thinking and to create products and processes that reflect that. That is what we see in what Brett has pulled together here. He has really pulled together an exemplary case of integrative thinking. And you don't get much bigger than the scope of what he's talking about here. So it's been an honor to serve as his Capstone Advisor, and I'll turn it back over to Brett.
So I'd like to take an opportunity to thank everybody for coming this morning. It's a Saturday morning. I know that there have been various capstone seminars that I've signed up to come to, and I've made some of them, and I haven't made others. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that you chose to spend your Saturday morning with me. So I'd like to start off with just a little exercise, make sure that everybody is somewhat awake. I'd like to see if everybody can raise their hands. Shannon? So I guess the question I would ask you is, what's possible from this position? Pretty much anything, right? It's limitless. When everyone says that, yes, I'm interested in doing something, that gives you an opportunity to do stuff. So let's start with some quizzes here. Has anybody ever bought a Toyota based on the name brand it has for quality? About 25, 30% of us. Has anybody used the term Google as a verb?
You mean this morning?
That would count as well. Has anybody ever visited a Disney theme park? Did you have a good time? Want to go back? Get that in Bring money, that's right. So does anybody know who comes up with the rides at Disneyland? Imagineers, absolutely. Which kind of brings me to me. I mean, I'm a career public servant, but I'm like to view myself as a public sector Imagineer. You know, and Imagineers always start by asking that question of what if, what is possible? As they mentioned in the intro, I've worked, if you call it, I served in the United States Marine Corps for 5 years. I was over in Somalia and in the Persian Gulf during '96. I've worked in both state and municipal government, and kind of a side note that kind of connects me to John McCain is I'm both a maverick and a pioneer in a different way, because the mascot of Mesa State College is the Mavericks, and the mascot of the University of Denver is Pioneers. And I'd like to let everybody know off the top that I'm human. And I'd like to start with this story when I was at the Department of Natural Resources. The Department of Natural Resources is located a block south of the Capitol. And it's not uncommon that we have suits come down from the Capitol to visit with the various people in the buildings that we're at. And it's one of those things that at the elevators there that, you know, you go into the elevator and you constantly hear, hey, hold the elevator for me. And if you do that, it's a trap. You don't really want to do that, because it's going to be several minutes of just really kind of waiting for, hey, hold the elevator, hold the elevator. So a friend of mine and I were getting ready to get on the elevator, and there was some suit right in front of us. You know, the elevator opens, we go in there, and when we hear from down the hall, hey, hold the elevator. So the first thing my friend does is just start hitting the door close button as fast as he can. You know, and so the doors start closing, and this arm comes through and holds it and opens back up, and we hear, hey, thank you. And in walks Governor Owens. And it so happens that the gentleman behind us was his staffer who just saw everything that we did. So I just want to get rid of any preconceived notions of perfection or anything like that. So another quiz. Who's excited about the upcoming election year and all the negative ads the state of Colorado is going to get? 1, 2. I mean, the issues are interesting, but you know, the negative stuff in there. Who is satisfied with customer service, innovation, and quality in the state of Colorado? Think about Shannon is Mr. Antithesis in today's meeting. So, one kind of final question before we get into the meat of it. Does anybody know who the most powerful person in the state of Colorado is?
Tim Tebow. No, he's in Vegas.
It's actually the person that assigns parking spots downtown. And nobody seems to know who this person is. So as I said earlier, an Imagineer starts by asking the question of what if. And let me tell you let's start by asking, what if we could get the highly dedicated workforce in the state of Colorado a model that would be more effective for them? Everyone here, I assume, has a driver's license and has been to the Driver's License Bureau. Well, I have my daughter Kayla and my wife April here, not for this purpose. They're just here for support. But it was kind of an interesting story. Kayla's going to be 16 next week, so everybody watch out on the roads. But April took Kayla to the Driver's License Bureau to get her permit. And we have a baby, and at the time, Adric was about 6 months old. You know, and they went in, you know, to get the permit. They're ready to go. April also had to get her driver's license renewed because we just recently moved. You know, and they sit there, and of course, it's packed. You know, everybody's there. They're waiting there for hours. And with a 6-month-old baby, you know, they could start feeling the hatred of everybody else in the room who's upset for being there and started, you know, projecting it at them and at Adric. So they finally get up, they get their turn, they're like, okay, we need to do this. And it's like, well, you need to bring some proof of residence. All right, well, we just waited here for 3 hours with the screaming baby, and you just now decide to tell us that? So they weren't able to get satisfaction that day, so they had to go home. You know, they had a real game plan the next day. It's like, you know what we're going to do here? We're actually going to be the first ones in the line in the morning. That way we can get in and out. You know, they're ready to go. They get there and they find a line that would rival any Disney theme park line. You know, I mean, it's already a couple-hour wait or, you know, 45-minute wait for them to get in. You know, they're not quite as forgiving to the people that are upset with Adric. You know, and they finally get up there. Kayla gets her permit. April gets her driver's license renewed. April pulls out the ATM card to pay for you know, the services. And it's like, we're sorry, we don't accept those. We can accept cash or check. Okay, so April pulls out the checkbook, and guess what? Down to her last check. It's It's like, well, can I write a check for both of them? We're sorry, we don't do that. You know, and it's really kind of typical of one of the touch points that the citizenry has with the state of Colorado, and kind of the perception of why can't a much different level than Disney, customer service be much improved? Why couldn't you have someone catch people at the door and actually walk them through a list of things that they could do better? So what is DIGOTO? Simply put, it's a chance to improve state government. I picked these particular companies because they consistently rank as the top 10. They're in the top 10 in terms of being global brands. And they're also ranked in the top 10 every year in terms of being the most innovative companies in the entire world. And as happenstance has, I was at Barnes & Noble one day and I was looking for the book that I didn't know I needed. And I was standing at a spot and I looked up and I saw a book called The Disney Way. I'm like, oh, you know, kind of understanding what it's about. And I looked over here and it's like there's a book called The Google Way. And then I turned around over here and there's a book called The Toyota Way. And it's like, well, what is it about these three companies that they have a way of doing business that is worthy of them having a book written about it? At the time I wrote this capstone, I worked for the state of Colorado. I actually had anticipated that I would work for the state of Colorado my entire life. I had an opportunity come up with the city of Boulder, so I'm still a public servant, which I think I will be for my entire life, but I've changed from the state of Colorado. And I wanted to find a meaningful, lasting, and low-cost options for the state of Colorado to improve its service delivery. Because it takes, you know, normally changing the law, it changes, you know, sometimes moving mountains to get some of the smallest changes made. And I must also warn you that there seems to be, if you are a current governor or a previous governor of the state of Colorado, there's a real allergy to this subject matter. During my proposal for this particular research, I had actually set out that I was going to interview all the previous governors that were still living in the state of Colorado. And they all turned me down with pretty much the same language of, we don't really do that anymore. And since I've completed my research, and I have really the target audience for this research is the governor of the state of Colorado. I've attempted to approach them several times and have been politely turned away. So it's kind of interesting that this has that there's an allergy at that level. And it kind of speaks to, if Governor Hickenlooper is genuine, and I truly believe he is in terms of, if you have ways to improve the state of Colorado, let me know. I think he's genuine about that. But what is the process for actually getting into that? And we'll actually get into feedback mechanisms in the state of Colorado a little bit later in this presentation. So here are the core elements of the model. First and foremost, this is a cultural revolution. It's not a business revolution. What the mandate of businesses and the mandate of government are completely different. My secondary research focused on these three companies and on current public sector trends that exist in the across the country. In fact, even some that extend internationally. Most of these 12 pillars are at odds with the command and control, due process, bureaucratic organization that is in government. And government has a need to be that way, but you can see where this instantly starts to scratch against what government is there to provide. Now, my experience with government employees is that they are hardworking, dedicated, and strongly intrinsically motivated. In fact, I know that we have a group right here that are current state employees, and I ran into one gentleman this morning, Mark, who was a previous state employee, and I'd like to take an opportunity to toast our state employees because they really get an awful lot done against a very negative ethic that is provided to them from the citizens. So let's take a brief opportunity to toast our state employees. Except for Shannon.
I consider myself a negative influence.
So does anybody read the comments at the end of articles on newspaper websites? You guys ever read them on government articles? Are the comments there very positive? They tend to be extremely negative. Do you think state employees read those comments too? You know, and that's why I think it's remarkable, and the reason why we went through a toast of state employees to think that the fact that they still come to work every day, even though they're the equivalent of professionally name-called in everything that they do, even though the people that say that really don't have a clue of the constraints that they go through in their daily lives. One of the outcomes, one of the things that I pitched in my capstone presentation, that I would love to do a longitudinal study where you basically check in with the same group of individuals over a period of time to find out when that breaking point actually exists, when people in a bureaucracy start to believe that they can actually do no good. Because people come and they're very naive, they're very shiny, it's like, hey, I'm going to change government, I'm going to make a difference. And they do each and every day, but the difference that they thought that they were going to make in changing the bureaucracy doesn't happen very often. And then people start to lose hope. And then after time, it's like, I'm not going to fight it. If this is what we're doing today, that's fine. The golden handcuffs are on. I'm 5 years away from retiring. I don't care anymore. And it would be very interesting to find out when that breaking point is. Last week. Was it a good week? I am truly appreciative of the help that I received from the Department of Personnel Administration, for without their help, I wouldn't have got my original research done. That being said, they didn't do a whole lot to go out of their way to help me. When I actually proposed my survey, they released it in an email to 29,000 state employees, but it was in a very routine email that not very many people read. It was buried, it was the second or third bullet item in there, and even my friends and colleagues that knew I was doing this research missed the fact that this email came out and actually invited them to participate in the survey. So that in mind, I actually review a response rate of 1.3% to be top shelf. You know, I'm actually very pleased with the response rate that I got considering those conditions. It was also noteworthy that some of the HR directors and some of the departments of the state of Colorado knew me or knew of my research and actually went out of their way to encourage their individual departments to participate in the survey, and they were called before their executive directors and had their proverbial knuckles cracked and saying, don't do that. And I think that speaks a little bit to them not knowing what my intentions were. And it's a very saturated environment, and a lot of surveys like this or studies that take place, you know, have a very critical nature of state employees. In this particular case is what I think that they were out to defend, and I actually think that state employees are our heroes. And I'd like to draw a specific dichotomy in terms of the nature of the research I did as opposed to the nature of, say, some other customer employment surveys that are out there. Most customer employment surveys look at how satisfied are you at your job or with your job. And what I look to study is how meaningful is your job to you, which is a much different perspective and pivot than what I think most people do. So let's get on with our story. Disney, Google, and Toyota really make people their brand. With Disney, even if you collect trash or clean the bathrooms, you have to go through what's called Disney University, which you have to spend 3 days getting, it's currently 3 days, indoctrinated into what the culture, what are the traditions, what are the storytelling, and what Disney is all about. And each and every person, from Bob Iger's, the CEO, to the person that is, you know, being the attendant to Daisy Duck or Donald Duck, each one of them has to spend a day as a costume character in the park. So they are immersed, they understand what is going on with their customers, they really invest in their team members, their cast members, before they actually move them to where they would have any interface with the public. Google has some very specific hiring practices. They profile exactly what it is that they're looking for. It's a year-long process. They're looking for people that basically have that graduate student, I'm going to study, I'm interested in learning for learning's sake and investing's sake, so they make sure up front that they're getting the people that they want that are going to represent them in their business. And Toyota has a fantastic mentoring program, especially for their leadership, where they actually walk through, this is what we expect of you, this is the storytelling that we have on what makes Toyota Toyota, and this is what we want you to do in terms of Today, we want you to come up with 80 to 100 improvement ideas in the little section of the operation that you do. 80 to 100 each and every day. So we get into what it was that I was studying in the next two slides. This slide talks about formal training, which is there a classroom? Is there prepared information that would tell me what's going on in the world? And informal is more, it's kind of the water cooler chatter, you know, just walking down the hall and asking someone that's been there for a while how things are going on. So if you look at the top 5 choices here, I'll get to other a little bit later, but it primarily talks about that I didn't have any training at all in my first 12 months. And they actually critique the way I asked the question that, you know, I didn't receive this kind of training in the first 12 months, but I did in the first 18 months. You know, so I mean, there's some critique on that. But if you look at each one of those, you know, signing up for employee benefits, sexual harassment, leave policy, workplace violence, they have a very distinctive flavor of being very logistical in nature of how is it that we're going to pay you for the service that you're going to provide for us, or very regulatory that, you know, that something happened that led to a change in policy. There's a saying in the Navy that, you know, behind every regulation that there's a dead sailor. And the type of formal training we do at the state of Colorado really screams that. And it's not my position to say that we don't need a workplace violence policy, that we don't need a sexual harassment policy, but should that be the only focus or the primary focus? I mean, there's a huge disparity in the visual representation there of the emphasis that we put on let's set a positive culture in the state of Colorado that does these things better, and this is what it means. These are our values within the state of Colorado. I think that you can see from this graphic that that's missing. Turn page. And predictably, you know, informal training doesn't carry the same regulatory bent that the formal training did. This is basically where people find out the who, what, when, where, and why of how I get paid, what benefits should I choose? Should I choose, you know, to take things out pre-tax? Should I choose to take them out post-tax? You know, what are the best health insurance policies to take? How does time off work? And this is where you start to see that organizational norms get discussed. You know, certainly with a much stronger frequency than they do when you're talking about formal training. You know, and why is that? I mean, I'm a big movie buff, and I know some of the people in the room know that, but if you remember back to the movie A Few Good Men, when Corporal Barnes is on the stand, you know, and Captain Ross is sitting there just haranguing him, you know, with book after book, and it's like, I'm a Marine as well. Where in these books does it tell me that I have a duty to commit this kind of hazing, which they call it a code red? He's like, well, it's not in the book at all. It's like, all right, well, it must not exist. And then, you know, Tom Cruise comes up and he hands him the book. It's like, well, can you turn to this page that tells me where the chow hall is? It's like, well, you know, you don't understand. That's not actually in the book at all. And it's like, well, you mean in the entire time you've been on station that you haven't eaten at all? It's like, no, sir, 3 squares a day. It's like, but if it's not in this formal book, you know, how is it that you knew where the chow hall is? It's like, well, I guess I just followed the crowd at chow time. You know, which I think speaks to a lot that if we don't deliberately set what our culture is, we're just going to follow what the crowd has become instead of what we want them to be and have a very deliberate organizational design. And I think that there are elements of this in a positive way in the state of Colorado. At the Colorado Department of Transportation, you can imagine one of the largest things that they focus on, their primary value, is safety. Well, they had their director of safety and another department director. They were driving out of the mountains down I-70. They were coming down the road, and they saw a road hazard in the way. So they pulled over because, you know, they wanted traffic to be safe. They got out of their car. They rushed over, they got it, you know, they made sure that they didn't get hit by a car. They came back in. They drove back to CDOT headquarters. Does anybody except the 2 folks from CDOT know what they did? They actually turned themselves in as safety violators because they didn't have an orange vest, they didn't have a hat on, and they engaged in an activity that was unsafe for them. And this created a powerful piece of storytelling for safety as a value at the Department of Transportation, because the people that are in charge said that, look, once we thought about what we did, we realized that we made a mistake, and we came forward to let you know that we don't want you to do the same mistake we did, that we want you to be able to go home to your family every night, because we can always build new roads, but we can't necessarily build a new you. So in this particular slide, and the reason that I included such a busy graphic is that I think visually creates a very telling story between organizationally how people feel that they are valued or how commitment those organizations are to their professional development, to where you get more closely down to their supervisor or their team. So in this particular graphic, green and red are good colors, and orange and blue show disagreement. What's the final color there? Purple is people were very neutral on it. So towards the top of the slide, I asked the question, do you feel the state of Colorado is committed to your professional development, and do you feel valued by the organization itself? I mean, if you walked up to a Disney cast member, do you think that they would say that they feel valued? If you were to walk up to anybody on the line at Toyota, knowing this fact, that anybody on the production line at Toyota can stop the line to make an improvement process change. Anybody can. Do you think that they feel valued? Do you think that they uphold that pillar that I showed in my model there of making people your brand? And I think that you can see quite clearly that the state of Colorado fails in this regard to really make people feel valued. But as you go closer to your supervisor and closer to your team, and I think if you interview most state employees, they will go, and you ask them the question, why do you go to work every day? They'll answer the question, it's the people that I work with that really make the difference, because they feel and they provide that value to each other. So I have to tell you a particular story in terms of the state of Colorado creating a norm for feeling valued. So the statewide IT consolidation that's taken place has been very top-down. And there have been reasons for that. I mean, to get things done in state government, sometimes you really have to drive it. That has created a culture in its own right. And this culture has been one of fear. One of the people are very kind of scared to act up and scared to speak up. And there's been some turnover at the governor. There's been some turnover at the cabinet. And they've really been working on trying to change this culture. So they actually worked on this employee satisfaction program, or this employee rewards program, that they had this presentation, they presented it to everyone in terms of how we can make employees feel more valued. And this was within the last week of, I had already accepted a job at the city of Boulder, and I actually called the person because I knew who put the presentation together. And I'm like, wow, you did a fantastic job, showing some appreciation, showing some recognition for what this person had done, and so it's like, man, I think this is, you did a great job researching it, you gave a great job of presenting it, I think that the organization has really bought off on it. One of the key pillars there is how to make employees feel valued. Well, this person asked me, it's like, so, how do you think the consolidation is going to go? And, I didn't realize the trap. I kind of spoke my mind, which I have a tendency to do. And I told this person, it's like, you know what? Until this organization, which is a support organization, learns how to listen to their customers and learns how to get feedback from their employees, this is still doomed to fail. You know what the response I got was? With your attitude, it's probably best that you're leaving the state. From the person that actually put together a presentation on making employees feel valued. But because I had intelligence and I held my own opinion, I held my own counsel on what it was going to take to have success in the organization, and I spoke up when asked for, I was smacked down immediately. And I think that's very symbolic of how things actually take place in the state. So survey time. Think right now to your life and your job. Let's see a show of hands. How good are you? Put yourself in that situation. How good are you at identifying who your customers are? Just a show of hands. It's not surprising, Shannon. So think to your experience with government and think back to how you answered the question of whether you're satisfied with your experience with government. Do you think government employees are good at identifying who their customers are? Yet, there was not a negative response in my survey of asking how good people are at identifying who their customers are. And I think that that's very honest. I think it's very innocent. I don't think that there's any malice about it, but people tend to self-inflate how good they are at particular things. And to put ourselves in state employees' shoes, it may not be as easy as you think it is. Let's do a little experiment right now with, let's say, the Division of Wildlife. And just shout it out if you guys have an idea. Let's see if we can identify who the customers are for the Division of Wildlife. Does everybody know what their mandate is to maximize wildlife habitat? So I know that there are 2 people from Wildlife that can get this started. So who's a customer?
Wildlife Commission.
Wildlife Commission?
Could be the section managers that I do projects for.
Section manager. For the agency. Who are the agency's customers? Hunters. Anglers. The people that view wildlife.
About the wildlife itself.
The wildlife itself. The people that are nuisanced by wildlife. How about the people that just live in a metro area and never go up in the mountains, but just feel happy and satisfied that there are wildlife out there and they're being taken care of? Can you see any kind of conflict in terms of trying to support your customer's mission when you have that kind of disparity in terms of supporting your customers? It can be very challenging. Do you think Google has those kind of challenges? Or Toyota? Or Disney? Absolutely, they've got a disparate customer base that they've got to deal with as well. You know, so it's not necessarily what we're saying to our customers, but how we say it. So it's noteworthy that, you know, 96% rated themselves a very good or exceptional at customer identification. It's also noteworthy that in a follow-up question, that 83% of people said that they received no formal training from their organization in terms of how to identify who their customers are, which I think that we can draw 3 distinct conclusions from this. One, that state employees receive the majority of their training informally. They follow the crowd at chow time. 2, because of the lack of customer identification training, employees simply don't have a standard or an objective to understand whether they're good at it or not. So how, of course you would self-inflate because we're the directors of our own movie. And I actually conflated the 2 topics there. You know, I think employees don't know the difference, and then the self-inflation is the 3rd piece. Please excuse my conflation. I put Dilbert's in here so I can drink water. Can everybody read that? Does anybody need me to read it? So, Rappert's customer support. You're speaking to a powerless rodent. My job is to prevent you from getting to anyone who is authorized to give refunds. I'd like to begin by asking you some creepy personal questions. I think this is very germane to government, especially with the notion of Big Brother. I mean, if we're advocating in this particular research that government should do a better job of reaching out to their customers to find out if we're doing a good job, will that be received as here's Big Brother asking for information that they shouldn't receive? For those of you that have been to a Disney park, have you ever been stopped? And I have another word for it, but have you ever been stopped going off of a ride, actually going into the bathroom, actually entering the park, actually anywhere, and asked to, how is the cleanliness of what you did? You know, can we send you an email later on? I mean, they are just fanatical about understanding what their customers want. Have you ever marveled at the results on a Google page, that how often what it is that you're looking for does appear in the first page, the top 25 options? I mean, because Google is fanatical of looking at that data and making determinations on what it is. They're actually, it started as an artificial intelligence project of actually helping people get to the information that they want faster. Has anybody ever been engaged in a customer service satisfaction survey with the state of Colorado? As a citizen. Okay. Nora. You know, Disney calls the art of knowing what your customers want guestology. You know, that they understand exactly what it is that their customers want. So does anybody know what the most common question at the Magic Kingdom, except the people I've already given this presentation to, does anybody know what the most common question at the Magic Kingdom is in Florida?
Where's the bathroom?
Where's the bathroom? Where's the bathroom? What else? So surprising that that's not it?
Lost and found.
Lost and found. The most common question asked in the Magic Kingdom is, what time is the 3 o'clock parade? And that is not a gag joke. It's not a gag question. What people are actually asking is, what time does the 3 o'clock parade pass the point that I'm standing at? And Disney knows this. Can you imagine if you would go back to a Disney park if somebody laughed at you for asking that question? They go, you know, it's going to pass this point at 3:17, and if you stand right there, your daughter's going to have an excellent view of Cinderella to wave at her. You know, that's how well Disney understands their customers. Can you imagine the experience that April and Kayla might have had if they understood the common problems that people have when they come in to the Driver's License Bureau? It would be a completely different experience, and I don't think it would cost a whole lot of money to implement. So 72% of the respondents in my survey said that their agency, they placed either a high or a very high emphasis on providing good customer service. However, only 22% of respondents said that there was any kind of feedback mechanism at all to actually get feedback on whether or not they're doing a good job at it. So those two things seem to be at odds with one another. So I put these arrows in to try to kind of get the right brain going a little bit and kind of wrap around, where the bulk of the answers kind of lie. In my 10 years with the state, there seems to be a big gap between providing external customer service and providing internal customer service. What do I mean by that? Is customer service to the different parts of our employees or to different departments or different divisions. Whether it was from HR, purchasing, legal, information technologies, and remember, I'm in information technologies. There can be times where you can walk in, say from IT to the procurement section, it's like, okay, I need to get a contract for something. The nonverbals you get, sometimes the verbals you get, and certainly the cooperation you get, would question whether or not they even recognized you as a customer at all. It's like, you're gonna have to wait, I've got other things that I've got to do, is the impression that is sent. So in these, sorry, let me read this real quick. So in terms of internal customer identification, the reason I kind of gathered those all together is that's the group of average, below average, or poor, which really shows that there's huge opportunities for improvement in terms of letting each other know what it is that you need. It's kind of similar to anybody on the Toyota line can stop the line, that they work together as a team. It's like, hey, this is something that we can do better. So customer service. It takes you 2 months to process my company's credit card expense reimbursement. So every time, I get in trouble every month for incurring late fees. Why must I be punished for your incompetence? Well, apparently I'm awesome. It's one of the best personal stories I have from the state of Colorado. I was a new hire in a particular department. In IT, we seem to have this probably inflated notion that the more screen space you have, the more work that you can get done. You know, it has absolutely nothing to do with reading Twitter while you're reading email. So I check into the IT department. Everybody there has at least 2 screens. And I'm like, well, I want 2 screens. I don't want to feel inferior. So I put in a help desk ticket to actually get a product. I had a laptop, so I found out that I needed a device to have the 2 screens. So I put in a help desk ticket, and I waited about a week. And I'm like, that's funny. So I went and checked, and apparently I put the ticket in wrong. So I submitted it. In about 30 seconds, I had this overeager service manager from the help desk come up. It's like, I know exactly what you need. He had a printout of it. It's like, you need to order this device. He had what company it was from. He's like, you just submit this through procurement, and you can get your device. I'm like, great. So I walk over to a very tenured, possibly curmudgeon-y person and ask them for help in getting this particular device. We looked at it as like, now every time I order something from this company, I get harangued with sales calls nonstop, even when I tell them to do it. You can't have it from this company. Remember, I'm not procurement. You need to go find somewhere else where we can purchase it, and we'll go purchase it. I'm like, okay. team player, new guy. So I went around to all the big boxes, I checked all the other sites, and lo and behold, the only place that I could purchase this device so I could get my 2 monitors was from this particular company. So I went back to it. It's like, I'm sorry, you're not getting it. I'm not going to get sales calls from people just because you need this device. You know, and it's like, well, you know, as irony has it, my best friend from the United States Marine Corps works for this company. He doesn't do our account, but if we went through him and I got him to pledge to you that he wouldn't give you any kind of sales call, could we order it through him then? Now remember, I literally went to war with this guy. You know, I was in Somalia with this guy. You know, I mean, if he tells me he's not going to call you, I would believe him. It's like, well, if you want to do it yourself, you know, that's fine. If you want to go through the process of dealing with him and expense it back, that is absolutely okay, but I'm not going to purchase it for you. I'm like, all right, Steve, you know, here's my credit card. You know, let's go ahead and get it figured out. I get my credit card receipt, I turn it in, it's 45 days later. Normally everybody else gets real fast turn back on getting reimbursed. And I went back to him and I asked, well, what's the holdup on this? It's like, you paid sales tax. We are exempt from sales tax. And I kind of lost it just a little bit. I'm like, the state of Colorado is exempt from sales tax. Brett, as an individual consumer that you made me go through this purchase for, I am not tax exempt. They paid me taxes. You're reimbursing me for the taxes because you gave me, you know, this huge runaround in terms of getting the smallest thing. It ended up taking me 3.5 months and doing all this other legwork, 29 disparate steps for me to actually get this particular device. This is what I mean in terms of state employees not providing or understanding that we're customers to each other. What I'm trying to call it here is rating the difference between, you know, because I specifically asked, you know, based on this experience, you know, how much emphasis do you place or how much importance do you place on customer service for your external customers and your internal customers? And as you can see, you know, remember that blue and orange are good. You know, for our external customers, we do a really good job, I think, of placing an emphasis on it. If you ask anybody at CDOT, if you ask anybody at the Division of Wildlife, they live and breathe the mission of supporting their constituents. But you can see that there is a huge drop-off when we start talking about what the emphasis is for providing it for our internal customers. So let's shift to the innovation part of the DIGOTO model. We had, in one of the classes I had here on organizational structures, we had just this fantastic discussion about what the role of government is. You know, and one of my professional mentors, you know, the former Speaker of the House, Russ George, you know, had this great speech that he used to give that government has a responsibility to act deliberately. That way Tim Tebow isn't automatically elected as governor of the state of Colorado. Government has a responsibility to act deliberately and slow society down sometimes. That we didn't just give in to what the tea movement wants, and conversely, we're not going to just give in to what the Occupy movement wants. That we actually slow them down. It's like, let's actually have some discourse and some discussion on stuff. So most people would see, if government has a role of due process, that they would see that as you know, in direct conflict to the role of innovation. You know, that you can pick one or the other, you can't have both. And one of the things that I advocate in my paper and advocate in my research is that this is actually a spectrum. And this is a spectrum that can move instead of being a fixed point in time. And I think that that's a key piece for government to try to be more innovative. And we'll actually get into some ways we do that as well. So does anybody know what fault tolerance is? What's that?
Is that mistake tolerance?
Mistake tolerance. It's actually the counter to the stop plate tectonics movement. All right, that's a joke. Plate tectonics is how earthquakes happen. If it was a political movement, we needed to stop it. He's absolutely right. It's whether or not we accept mistakes or how easily are we forgiving for mistakes. And that is very important to give people a sense of actually taking a risk and taking a chance. So you're absolutely right. So for Disney, it was a huge gamble to put the entire family fortune behind a full-length, color, completely sound integrated cartoon of Snow White. Or it was a huge risk to go out there, and at the time they didn't exist, certainly not the way Disneyland did, to actually make a theme park. And I mean, their risks don't always have success either. Show of hands, who went to see Mars Needs Moms? Mars Needs Moms, one of the biggest flops in animation history. That there's no way they're ever going to recover the amount of money, but they take risks. And those risks have a tendency to pay off. So at Google, people are actually encouraged to spend 20% of their time working on projects that they want to work on. And I think projects of their own choosing. They can even be personal projects. This leads to all kinds of innovations, certainly the improvements in search. They're actually challenging Microsoft right now for the office productivity space, challenging Microsoft Word and Excel. But it also leads to an awful lot of failed projects. Anybody ever used Google Wave? I know that Evans and I tried to use it for my capstone, but it's a product that's actually gone by the wayside. That was going to change. We didn't need email anymore because we were going to have Google Wave. And for Toyota, it's giving a license to everyone to be able to stop the line for a process improvement. So let's talk about that for a minute. They actually anticipate every single one of their employees on the line. Doesn't matter what they're doing. We may call it very rote work. They call that person a knowledge worker. And one of the best success stories they have is they have a paint station. They bring a car in, someone paints the car black, goes on, they paint the next car black. Okay, they get to this particular point, it's time to paint the car red. Well, their process before is they would have the nozzle here, they would have the hose here, they would have the paint here, they would have the air compressor. Every time they changed colors, the line is down for 4 hours because they had to go and they had to blow out all of the hoses, they had to blow out all the nozzles. The person at the line is like, well, what if you move the paint from here to here and make it part of the nozzle? So they did that. Instead of being down for 4 hours, it only takes them 10 minutes to do the change out. And they expect dozens of those kinds of improvement ideas each and every day. And that is very risky because not every single one of those ideas has merit. Not every single one of those ideas gets implemented. So these results, from left to right, they ask, I work for a fault-tolerant organization that allows me to take risks. I have a fault-tolerant supervisor. In my organization, I'm afforded time to analyze and improve my job, and my organization has processes for employees to submit ideas. Now, I tried to put a block around the orange. I kind of left the neutral out of it, but it becomes more powerful when you put the neutral in there. But you can see that we, as an organization, really don't put a lot of backing in state government. In fact, one of the open-ended comments that I got from my survey was that government tends to operate in a CYA environment. That, there's actually the Paula Woodward rule that gets informally invoked in an awful lot of meetings. It's like, okay, we've made this decision, but there are investigative reporters out there that are looking for anything to talk about. We need to talk about what that's going to mean for us. And you can see really good ideas get backed away from because newspapers are out there. And, in terms of, that last question is there a process for submitting ideas and do people know about it? I have to say, even within this research, and I've tried a half a dozen times to get this in front of the cabinet, to get this in front of the governor, I have to admit that I don't know what that process is myself. So I think it's very indicative of how people feel. So what we're talking about here is basically innovative ideas, that your supervisor is receptive to ideas, that my organization is receptive to the ideas, and man, we really start moving to people don't feel that that's true, that I have an outlet to provide my input on how to improve my team or organization, or I have innovative ideas that should at least be considered. And it's very interesting. I told you that I studied the 3 companies, and then I also studied current public sector trends. And it's most contemporary research right now on leadership and organizations will tell you that in the public sector, innovation comes from frontline employees and their supervisors. They don't come from the turnover at the council. They don't come from the turnover at the legislature. They don't come from the turnover at the cabinet. So these are the people that know best. You know, I think if we were to ask the people at the Driver's License Bureau if they knew of the problems that we were talking about, I bet you they'd tell you that they would. And they'll also tell you how constrained they are, that they're not allowed to show favoritism from one person to another because then it spirals out of control because, you know, Bill gets it this way and then Shannon comes up. It's like, well, you let him have 2 transactions on a single check or whatever it is. So I think that there's a real defense mechanism in there. In this particular question, in terms of do I have a voice for my ideas, there was definitely a significant statistical difference between supervisors and non-supervisors. Supervisors felt that they had a much stronger voice because they probably have access to the key players. And then the open-ended comments in my research, there was definitely a very strong bent to, I don't have that access. I'm bottlenecked through my supervisor. People don't want to listen to it. I'm always told we're constrained by money. You know, so it's very, very constrained in that matter. And you compare that to the native creativity at Disney, that, you know, Disney has to grow or it dies. You know, I mean, if you think of your standard government org chart, it's very pyramid, you know, 1, then 2, then 5. You know, when they, in the 1940s, when the Walt Disney Company was making movies, they had a circular org chart with story in the middle, and everything went in and out through story. That's how much collaboration and innovation, that it wasn't a command and control structure. And I don't know that that would actually work in government, but it might work in projects. You know, it might work in cross-departmental projects. I mean, there's a possibility there. At Google, when you spend your 20% of your time, if you come up with a good idea, you submit it to a peer group. That peer group, if they go, hey, you've really got something here, they give it forward and Google will actually fund the idea. Okay, I'm not necessarily saying that the state of Colorado fund every idea that an employee comes up with, but here's a low-cost option. What if you allow them to do what Google does next, and that's allow them to champion the project to completion? What a huge reward, what a huge pat on the back, and what a huge incentive for an intrinsically motivated employee to get the reward that they're looking for, that not only did you have a good idea, but you go and execute that idea. And I've already talked about Toyota in the line as well. So asking the question of why employee suggestions fail. And you get a pretty standard list of, you know, it wasn't the favorite idea of the day, you know, it wasn't, there wasn't the funding for it, you know, I didn't have a voice for it, that, you know, my supervisor was against the idea and the idea died right there. But some of the other ideas that came up there is that, you know, risk and change avoidance is so deeply ingrained in the cultural value of my organization, there's just, it's not something that we put any kind of focus on. They mentioned that there's no formal mechanism for suggesting ideas, that there's no one in charge of innovation. So even if I had a good idea, there's no one to actually take that. You know, because a kindergarten class, you know, can do as much brainstorming and probably better brainstorming than probably all of us in our room. The difference is, and this is where, you know, it becomes creativity or it becomes innovation, is taking those ideas and actually turning them into value. And that's where it seems to be the roadblock for the state. The organization is afraid, there's a CYA attitude, and the state does not actively encourage citizens or actively encourage their employees to improve performance. These are all comments, open-ended comments from the responses I had on it. You know, the other thing that I found just fascinating when I asked, you know, why is it do you think ideas fail, is that employees, instead of writing why it failed, actually wrote what their ideas were, which makes it a huge treasure trove of ideas that, like I said, is really the reason that I would like the government to consider it. One of the first ones out there is the item up there of the budget process is limited to a single year focus, which means that we have a fiscal year, you know, the joint budget, the governor pitches it, the joint budget committee, you know, makes their recommendations on it, and it finally gets passed into the long bill. And what this leads to is a tremendous amount of waste that any kind of lean process in the Toyota production system would just, they would lose hair over it, right? Because what happens is at the end of the year, you've got X amount of dollars. it's not enough to do the project that you want that could actually provide value for the citizens. So you end up getting the spending spree on new chairs or new furniture, or everybody getting widescreen monitors. That because there's this belief that if you don't spend the money, you're not going to get it next year. And I think that's empirically proven. So I think there's an awful lot of wasteful spending because you don't have enough money to cross the fiscal years. So what if we did have a 2-year budget cycle? What would that mean? Well, here's a thought. Maybe that we only have the legislature meet every other year. There's an innovative idea. If you consider last year, we actually had dueling bills on daylight savings time. One say we're going to go all in on daylight savings time. The other's like, we're never going to be on daylight savings time. You know, I think there's some in the constituent base that might say that you actually have too much time to legislate and not enough time to actually focus on real meaningful issues that would have an impact. And if I indicted anybody who has strong stance on daylight savings time, my apologies. Other ideas that they pitch is, streamlining the financial processes and improving procurement and contracting functions. So what are the consequences of taking risks? I ask the question is, if you had an idea that could provide improvement for the organization and it was a success, what would happen? Would you get a whole bunch of accolades? It's kind of interesting that here are some of the open-ended answers that really tell the moxie of state employees. The reason why we toasted these individuals in the room here today. That I might or might not get credit, but that is unimportant as long as the idea got implemented. That's the reward. And another one is, I would get credit, but I would not expect an award. After all, I'm a taxpayer, so I get my reward by cost savings and the good feeling of helping my state. So those are some of the positive comments that came out of it. Conversely, there were some negative ones as well. And I think this really speaks to people not wanting to participate in the process. And that longitudinal study that I talked about, how many times of getting hit with a stick does it take before you quit wanting to get hit with a stick? Not only do I feel that someone else in my organization will get credit for my idea, but it has happened several times since my hire. Another comment was, it often becomes the supervisor's idea. And finally, it's like someone else would get credit and I would get punished. I know this for a fact because it has happened several times to me personally. As such, I'm reluctant to even think about improvements for this organization. And I think that trend needs to stop. And don't think that the 3 companies that we talk about are perfect. Because, there has definitely been some backlash to Walt Disney himself about he would get all these accolades for all of the work that everybody else would do. And certainly he financed it. He had the ideas for it. He had the vision for it. But, getting credit isn't unique to the public sector. And I think that you'll find that the companies that we're talking about here in the DIGOTO model would also prey victim to that. So I picked on driver's license enough. Anybody ever been to the Department of Motor Vehicles? Great experience there? Does it seem like this at all?
No, lines are longer.
What's that?
Lines are longer.
The lines are longer. I guess I could pivot it, stretch it out a little bit. So there's a gentleman, Ken Miller, who writes on public sector trends, and he wrote one on performance management for dummies and other public sector officials, which I thought was a great title. They talked about Department of Motor Vehicles in another state. And I think that this was very telling because they would get all kinds of feedback and backlash that, we just hate coming to the Department of Motor Vehicles. And so they started to do some guestology, right? And they would go and it's like, well, what do you hate the most? And it's like, well, the line is too long. It's like, well, why is the line too long? It's like, well, I wait in a line here. I get all the way to the front. I get up there, and it's like, we're sorry, you're in the wrong line with the wrong form. You need to go over there. And then I've got to wait through the other line to get through it. So I don't know where to go. Well, and the public officials started scratching their head, and they're like, well, that's odd, because right there's a great big sign that says that if you need this, go here, and you need this, go here. So they're like, what's the holdup? What's the problem? So they started to observe. They spent a week observing people come in. Do you know how people enter the Department of Motor Vehicles? You know what they did? I wonder how much money this would cost. They took the sign off of the roof and they laminated it on the ground and they cut wait times in half. You know, and this is where I think we actually need to observe and study how citizens are using the products that we have. And I think that we can actually make it a much better product. So I'm asking here which ideas get listened to. We've got safety, we've got if there was a quality problem, could you report it? I asked if you had an idea that would improve your organization but would require radical change, would you be, is your organization willing to do it? And then I asked it if it was an incremental change. And basically what I think this shows is that there is a huge precedent for us listening to state employees that's already set. Look at this. If it's a safety issue, I almost went diving through that screen. If it was a safety issue, and that wasn't on purpose, that, you know, there's a very strong trend, there's this very strong opportunity that that idea gets implemented and it will get listened to and corrected. And quality's not bad, but when we start talking about how we can improve our processes and how we can make things better, you see just this huge shift that, you know, I mean, hardly anybody says that I completely agree with that idea. And I think this is the piece that we can change with this organizational revolution. This is the part that frustrated Evans to a degree. And I mean that very politely. I had a much different reason for my education than I think some people. To me, it wasn't about the degree. Writing the capstone wasn't about finishing a milestone. I didn't want this to become some academic paper that ended up collecting dust in a library that didn't have any practical value. So what I wrote on here was an action plan. It's like, I can hear the state government talking about, it's like, you know, everybody thinks that they're so smart. You know, they see what's wrong, but nobody ever actually tells, how do you get there from here? And I wanted to actually take that next step, and it's like, okay, you have these 3 companies, you know, we're never going to be Disney, we're never going to be Google, we're never going to be Toyota, so how do you get there from here? So I wrote an action plan that the governor can pick up, and of course that they can modify any way they wanted. For me, the satisfaction truly would be if the ideas got implemented. And it starts with a values jubilee. So I don't know if any of you remember starting in the 1980s and 1990s that IBM, one of the global powerhouses for 100 years, was almost at the risk of being broken up and disappearing as a company. Sal Palmisano took over as the CEO. He just actually recently retired. And one of the things he did in terms of the changing of the organization to where they're back as one of the powerhouses on the globe in terms of their own brand, is they did what's called a values jam. And what they did, it was a 72-hour seminar on all employees all across the world that they got everyone to participate, including every single executive, and they actually talked about what are our values? What should our values be? What do you see that's right? What do you see is wrong? There was a huge amount of participation in it. It ended up being like over 10,000 comments on it. Sal went, he printed it off, it was 3 pages long. He took it home one day, or he took it home over a weekend, he read every single comment. He came in the next day, put the stack on his executive team's desk or on the board table, and he's like, you need to read every single one of those comments. Because if you think that we have this place wired correctly, you're wrong. And this led to a change in the values. And because the entire workforce at IBM got to participate in it, it got to be values that there was ownership and belief, and it changed a job to something that they have passion about, that they have a want to go do. And I am recommending that we do something similar in the state of Colorado. You know, I think in modern times, there probably hasn't been a point where the governor has addressed the state workforce entirely at the same time. Now, I'm not saying we need to bring everybody in from Durango. I'm not saying that we need to bring everybody in from Sterling. But, you know, if you sit down at a movie theater, they talk about how you can have, you know, all these global conferences, that you get everybody together at the same time and you address them. It's like, look, we have a real opportunity to instill a different different belief system in how we do our job, and you can address them all at the same time, and then you execute this. And the most important piece off of this, if you are going to ask employees for their opinion, and there are employees here that could probably talk to this, you better listen to them because they've got some really good ideas. The second piece of that is, coming up with a director of innovation to kind of deal with who's going to handle these ideas when they come in, and certainly revamping indoctrination training. So it's not entirely regulatory based. If you're going to set a belief system out of this values jubilee, incorporate it and make it the emphasis of your indoctrination training. So you come in and from line employees actually hear stories of what it means to be a state employee, what it means to provide service, what it is that we're after in terms of trying to improve it. And if you see something wrong, bring it forward and we'll make a change to it. Another piece of the indoctrination training is let's shift to the way Google hires. Because of the state personnel system, you have the rule of 3, which means that you have to end up with 3 candidates. The funny thing about that is because of how long it takes, sometimes you end up with 2. And you can't break out of the rule of 3. If those 2 don't meet your needs, you have to wait 6 months, then repost the position and try to fill it then, which creates real problems. So instead of us doing the Google thing of we're going to pick Google material, it ends up being we're going to accept anybody that we need because we've got a job to do and we can't go another 6 months without it being filled. So let's start actually looking for people that have that strong intrinsic motivation to be a public servant. Take some risks. Anybody read the book Drive by Daniel Pink? A couple people. There's a great story in there about Atlassian. I hope I said that right. I struggled in the rehearsal on that too. It's a software company in Australia that did a revolutionary thing. On a Thursday night, they had a pizza party right at 5 o'clock. When the pizza party was done, they're like, look, you have the next 24 hours to work on anything you want to work on. There's one rule. It can't be anything that you do in your day-to-day job. They did it, they came back, and it's like, well, let's see what happened off of that. They saw this huge uptick in terms of people getting to bug fixes that they were waiting for that magical day where if I don't have anything else to do, I'll work on it. And they found a huge number of innovation ideas, and they found a huge increase in motivation and passion from their employees that they actually turned it into a quarterly exercise. So during fiscal years 2008 to 2010, there were 8 furlough days in the state of Colorado. Now that's actually an example of innovation, that we're going to shut down government to save money because we can't pay employees with the downturn in revenue. Well, what they found is that what you did is you inconvenienced an awful lot of citizens, but because most state employees have a critical status in terms of we really didn't want our guards to not guard the prison that day, and we really didn't want our the Colorado, the state patrol not being out there doing their job, that it wasn't necessarily cost effective. But we proved that we're actually willing to shut down government for a day. And I guess one of the philosophical questions that I'd ask for you that maybe we can get to when we get to questions is, what if the governor came out, and this is where the media blitz came out, it's like, we hear you. We know that you're not happy with the way government works. You want to know something? We're not happy either. So this is what we're going to do about it, and it's a complete change to the way government does things. We're going to shut down government for one day, and we're going to let employees work on anything that they want to work on. Whether we end up with good ideas or bad ideas, please realize that the state of Colorado will benefit because we become a learning organization, and we start taking risks to figure out what is working and what is not working. And we ask for your support on that. In terms of, well, we're just going to shut down government because we don't have the money. What if we shut down government proactively for one day and find out what the results were? I suppose that there's a chance, and I'm a betting man, so I would be willing to bet against this. I suppose there's a chance that we'll find that stereotype that most state employees are lazy and they'll go skiing or not leave their couch or do whatever it is. But I'm willing to bet that you would get this entire pile of fantastic ideas that don't cost, some of them won't cost money, but I bet a lot of them won't cost a lot of money, and we actually take a minute to think about our job instead of just spend the entire time doing a job that we don't think about. That's what I mean about taking some risks. And if it's successful, maybe we do it quarterly, maybe we do it semi-annually. And the final piece there that I have on here is take care of your employees. Each and every one of those companies takes care of their employees, and I don't want to give favoritism to Google, but last week they were rated again as being the most preferred workplace in the world by Forbes magazine. And I'm not saying the state of Colorado should fund what Google does in terms of free daycare, free massages anytime you want, to have the chef from the Grateful Dead actually make free food for you. But there's a lot of things that we can do to actually make our employees be valued and make our employees be the brand that represents the services that we provide for our citizens. Oh, he's done with all the slides. So DIGOTO is an opportunity to make work in any organization more meaningful. Just because I picked state government as my target, you could actually apply the ideas of going through a values jubilee, of actually creating feedback mechanisms, of actually taking these ideas and applying them to any organization. And it ultimately will lead to a more engaged, a more productive workforce that will improve any organization's bottom line. I truly believe that real, meaningful, and visible improvement is possible for the state of Colorado. We just have to follow the Walt Disney saying, the best way to get going is to stop talking and start doing. And I think if we start listening to our employees and taking those ideas to value, we'll do it. So, yeah, that sounds pretty fantastical. Sounds like a fairy tale, so I'm going to end with a Disney story. So there's a story in terms of, there was this little boy at the Magic Kingdom in Florida who lost his tooth. His mother picked it up, went over to the drinking fountain, he washed it, she dropped it down the drain. One of the cast members saw what happened and actually walked over to the drinking fountain. It's like, don't you worry about anything. Of course, the boy is starting to freak out because the tooth fairy's not going to come. You know, and so they call maintenance, they come and they pull it apart, and they don't find the tooth. The cast member, without missing a beat, he's like, we want you to meet us at time, or in front of town hall at exactly 5 p.m. Go enjoy your day. So the family comes back at the anointed time, and this, you know, like what would be reserved for an engagement ring, they open a box and they presented the tooth to the little kid who was just ecstatic that the tooth fairy was going to come. They had a little ceremony to present the tooth. All was good. Well, they didn't find the tooth. The maintenance guy and the cast member actually went back in the shop and they manufactured a tooth that could convince the little kid that it was his tooth. Now, do you think it's in the job description of a cast member at Disney to make false teeth to fool children? Or when people believe in their mission so much, they're willing to go all in to make the experience magical for their customers. And I think that there's an opportunity that we can instill passion in the organizations that we support. And as any good Imagineer would ask, an Imagineer always starts by asking, what if? Well, what if we could take some of these ideas and implement them in state government? Do you think we would have a different answer to the question of how satisfied you are with the customer service, innovation, and quality? Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions.